Welcome to the Mind Garden podcast, where we explore how brain science is shaping humanity's future. Hosted by Becca Chambers and Jev Ray, we dive into the cutting-edge world of neuroscience, exploring how breakthroughs in healthcare, education, and human potential are redefining what's possible. Hello, and welcome to the Mind Garden podcast. Today we're joined by Dr. Anthony McCrovitz, a leading clinical psychologist who's pioneering the intersection of neuroscience and therapeutic care. As the executive director of the Quality of Life Institute, he's revolutionizing how we approach mental health through innovative programs like EEG neurofeedback and cutting-edge therapeutic environments. His work combines neuroscience with what he calls a culture of gentleness, creating a fascinating bridge between technology and compassionate care. With 3 books under his belt, including his latest on creating meaningful therapeutic environments, Dr. McCrovitz brings a unique perspective on how brain science and human connection can work together to transform mental health care, and I'm very excited to have him here today. So, Tony, welcome to the Mind Garden podcast.
Oh my gosh, thank you for this opportunity. What a beautiful thing to connect. And hopefully, if you take away anything, as we know, we only remember 7% of what we hear. So get it over with. It's about connecting, not correcting. So everything else is just an extra Christmas gift from old St. Nick.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And before I turn it over to my co-host, Jev, to ask some of the questions that are on our mind, I'd love to hear from you about a little bit about your background and how you got interested in neuroscience.
Well, my focus has always been about quality of life and the services working to create meaning and value. It's not about right or wrong, but if you think about it, it's the meaning you have and the value that you connect with the people that live through what we call a biopsychosocial relationship framework. As you shared, as a licensed clinical psychologist and a mental health counselor, my roots are in the philosophy of gentle teaching, which really focuses on this culture of gentleness, creating meaning and connections. And as the executive director with my colleagues, I feel that we're developing and delivering therapeutic tools, training material, programs, not just locally, but internationally. Being a kid from Gary, Indiana, I've been in over 50 countries, so I feel very blessed that people invite me into their space to really come up with things such as, like we call Navigating the Heart. It's a crisis intervention program. Or the Exercube from my colleagues from the university and from Switzerland, which is a holistic fitness program and device. Or as you were addressing, the EEG neurofeedback in combining red light therapy. But overall, it's about improving people's quality of life. And then also working with programs like Clubhouse, which is an international community of peer focus to address mental health and promote skill development. But I think for my own career, it's really dedicated from my parents, what they have taught me, and also my Heavenly Father, which really, they said, break down barriers, address the marginalized individual, particularly for those with intellectual disabilities, and really enhancing quality of life and social emotional growth. And my approach has always been integrating the neuroscience. What's going on in here, right? The sensory integration, the relationship, the building to create and sustain solutions to enrich one's quality of life. I know you asked only for probably 5 cents, and I gave you $1.25. So bonuses today.
I'll take it. Thank you for that. All right, Jev, take it away.
Absolutely. And, once again, welcome, Dr. Tony. It's a pleasure to have you here today. One thing I really do enjoy about, having you here and speaking with you is, just your approach and your sense of humor as well, man. I mean, we definitely didn't ask for the $1.25, but love to have it. Curious, you spend a lot of time, speaking about quality of life, and particularly that has been a very guiding part of your overall philosophy, as well as how you develop the Quality of Life Institute. Want to hear a little bit more about the inspiration behind that and what really drove you towards really wanting to improve upon the quality of life of individuals.
Yeah. On a personal end, I thought everybody had the white picket fence, the mom, the dad, the 2-car garage. that's not true, right? And so very early on, when I went away to school, because I was, remember, so much a bad little kid, so I went to a Catholic boarding school at the age of 13. I realized that we have our own gifts, and if you don't bring those gifts to the table, you're not going to be able to share all heart and soul and mind. And so the Institute took that image or that seed that was planted very early on as a child that my parents gave me, that we could give, right? We can give, we could remove those barriers. And yet there was also a lot of barriers because who am I as a kid, right? Who are we as a colleague? And so we have to climb the ladder to get those degrees and to write those papers and to publish and to, be all over. But what a blessing. What a blessing from that little seed that was planted many years ago because my friend Natalie, who was a student at our school because they rented out the gym, she was amazing because what she did was every time she got mad, she picked up something like a TV and threw it through the window. I'm thinking, man, that is remarkable. But if I did that, Brother Eugene would say, you're grounded. You can't go to town. You can't do this. And I thought, no way. I could try to stay in this silo, in this narrow path to try to make good decisions. My mom told me about making good decisions. Doesn't hurt you, doesn't hurt anybody else, doesn't break any rules. We follow our schedule, we show respect, keep your hands and feet to yourself, don't disturb others. So I did good with that. But when I saw Natalie do this one day, of course, being in high school, my peers and I were always making fun of those kids from that classroom that got on that bus. But one day I walked over to Natalie and I just said, Nat, can I share something with you? And she goes, yes, I know I'm a bad girl. And I said, no, you might make some bad decisions. And so we developed a relationship and we talked about trying to make good decisions, trying to figure out how in those moments that we get ourselves in, remember it's about connecting, not correcting, that how could I, as a 13-year-old kid, be with Natalie and show her? So for a while, that's what I did. I taught her what my parents taught me. We'd go to gym, play basketball, and talk about our emotions. Didn't understand even what the prefrontal lobe was. I knew I have a brain, and my dad used to say I sit on it versus trying to implement it. But then one day in class, Brother Eugene and the teacher, Miss Karen, came to me and said, can we talk to you? Well, I thought I was in trouble, and that's a whole other story, a whole different time. But the bottom line is they're like, wait a second, what did you teach Natalie? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? So they told me Natalie got upset. She walked, she ran out, ran to the gym. She started playing basketball. And they asked, they're like, well, what are you doing? They're like, well, my good friend Tony told me I'm not a bad person, sometimes made bad decisions. And she was repeating everything that we were talking about. But, as a 13-year-old kid and two adults sharing with me something good, I wasn't used to that. And so the seed about quality of life, I started opening my eyes and looking around the gifts that we have, not what we don't have, because I was always complaining. The girls' campus was 5 miles down the road and it wasn't close enough for me, right? It needed to be across the street. But in these moments, I started looking around, what am I going to do with these gifts? And what is, and that was quality of life. I look at myself and I have to realize I'm very privileged. I'm a male and I'm white. And so I have to look at my own gifts and my own blessings and realizing it's not to take advantage of that, but really looking at. And so I have spent my whole life trying to nurture that seed and to help others, to do with others, but also to have fun, to know when it's time to get away, to find that peace for yourself. But yeah, that's how quality life started. And it's remarkable where we're at. We're writing, we're doing things, and I have friends that want to do things with me. I could share, I have so many toys that people say, wait, I like what you do. Could you use what we have and maybe create something, do some research. And so my youngest son, Peter James, he goes, man, Dad, you are remarkable. You are remarkable, and you have the best toys. I said, okay, Peter James, is it I'm a good dad, a remarkable dad, or I'm a good, remarkable dad because I got the best toys? I mean, I have robots, 4 of them, big, small, talking, all this. I have all kind of projectors, the Exercube. I got an EEG cap costs as much as my house. It's endless. It's endless. And of course, Peter James looks at me and goes, well, you do have the best toys, Dad.
Maybe it's a bit of both, right?
Right, right. But it's that curiosity, right? We talk about the curiosity. And I think, we get so focused with the traditional model. Being from Indiana, it was Skinner, the observable. What I observe is most important. But you know what? We could look at somebody and not realize that when they got off the plane, we can complain that their 4 kids were not being good and that father not doing what he should have done to get his kids in line to behave on the plane ride. So we come with judgment, right? We're all passengers on this plane looking at this father, and we don't do as good a job as everybody else does with our kids. And so here's everybody judging us. And yet when we got off the plane and the father looked at all of us, he says, we just buried my wife. I have no idea, right? I have no idea what I'm going to do. Our perspective changes. So when we look at what Skinner have given us, right, modifying the behavior, rewards and consequence, it's the observable. And what we have to think about, what we have in the neuroscience, is now we can go deeper. We can go deeper to explore that in these moments with our devices. And if you think about some of the kids that I work with are nonverbal, and all they want to know that they're excited to be with us. I mean, if you think about younger, you might have been excited about a person you wanted to be with, and yet they wanted to leave you. But yet they were good, how they smiled and the appropriate words. But here we could use simple tools to put on a child's head, to put on the mom's head, and to watch a beautiful dance of in real time. That's what I love. I'm just the kid from Gary, and I'm trying to figure out why do we need to connect. Why? Because I'm not smart enough to create the program and the device to be with this child and this mom. And so when we collaborate, as we're doing, right, with you guys, it's creating these devices, creating the software, and then real time. I'm smart. I'm the smart one that could turn on the TV, right? Turn on the TV, see it live. And now Johnny is saying, Mom, for the first time that she's able to see, I'm excited to be with you. What a blessing. Oh my God, that's quality of life.
That's unreal. I mean, when we first talked to you and you told me that story, like I got chills. Like you are creating something that cannot exist otherwise. And like as a mother, I mean, what better gift are you giving to that person and their child than communication? So I'm going to get teary just talking about it.
But it's changing that lens, because the traditional lens, Alfie Kahn, big in the educational world, he talked about our focus is about compliance, that we do this to get that. But I want to take it further, because I call it the 3 C's. I want compliance from you, and if not, I'll correct you. And if you need to be corrected again, I'm going to give you that consequence. If we really could see what we're able to do, and once again, narrow little mind with my limited ability, we're just looking at what? Can I trust you? That's the first thing, right? Johnny's asking, Mom, can I trust you? And if there's trust, I think I'm going to be excited and I'm going to be less bored. And so we know what Carl Rogers talked about with intrinsic learning from his theory. It's curiosity, right? It's exploring. So we could see that in real time. Maybe what Mom needs to see is just a smile. But then with the framework of gentle teaching, we talk about eyes, hands, words, presence. Those are the tools that parents have. We could talk about the prefrontal lobe and the subcortex and all those other areas. that might allow us, which we know and we've been working on for a long time, different strategies. But now we can measure this activity to really see that there's trust there. They like doing things with us, so it's about helping. And then knowing, I mean, even my role as a professor, they already know who the professor is. They might have certain comments. Oh gosh, there he goes again, right? But I have to invite them in. I have to invite them in to the environment that we can learn. We could have all the knowledge. And remember, not just one, I got 2 PhDs. So, I kind of joke, why do the students call you Dr. Tony? And I said, well, you should know the rules of the campus life. When you have 1 PhD, we call you by your last name because you're one of the chosen. But when you got 2, now we call you by your first name. So we are in a select group that how do we provide that invitation? And we can say there's conditions to the class, right? You got to pass this exam, turn in this paper. But the beauty that we have in this invitation and to see it in real time is priceless. Because even with this mom who took a chance with me and say, I don't know everything. That's what I like about Bethel when we talk about EMDR. He's honest, even though very intelligent. He says, we don't know. And I think we got to be humble enough that with the curiosity, tools like the framework of gentle teaching, quality of life, they allow us to focus in on the relationship. And so we could expand with that.
Absolutely.
With great tools in real time that we could have a dance. I don't dance. I did it once on my wedding, but the whole thing is this beautiful exchange of the relationship that we have. What a blessing, what a gift.
Indeed. And quite a bit to touch on there. And it really is a blessing to have, for one, somebody who is intrinsically cares about, the impact that one can have, for themselves, but also within their general belonging, within their general surrounding, right? Within their family, if you will. And it's something that you really mentioned in the story that you gave first and foremost that I wanted to comment on, is about the level of impact that, such simple things can have into somebody's own, perception of themselves, as well as, how they, now place themselves within their family and their society, right? Being able to provide these simple tools, if you will, like you mentioned in your framework, to allow somebody to develop within themselves. And then thereafter, when you really think about how this individual now improves upon their own quality of life. I mean, yeah, I like the way that your framework and your model and your approach has, kind of grown from just that simple exchange to now, an entire practice, if you will. And it's really exciting the directions that it could take for you. When you think about now how EEG has been leveraged in this way, like you had mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's think back, beforehand, right? This technology has been around for some time. We all know this,
Mm-hmm.
and for some time it's been leveraged in this way. But when you think about the past and how it's been leveraged in that way versus, emergent BCI, if you will, what would you say has been most impactful from the past till now? How the technology has transformed in the way you applied your framework, really.
I think back, I didn't have these tools.
Mm.
And so it was all about the observable and giving people punishments because they didn't comply. My little friend Michael, who was sprayed with water, or John, who had electrical helmet to shock him every time he hit himself. I mean, I can give you a list of stories. And yet, in that moment, I'm like, God, make me smarter, And what he gave me more of was negative emotions to not have a healthy dialogue with my colleagues. So I didn't do a good job of building bridges, personal life, professional life, community life, because I was looking and saying, I know there's more. I know there's more. And I know if we had technology. And so I started with just basic tools, evidence-based assessments that started with assessing the prefrontal lobe. I started with that as the initial exchange of what we know. We call it lagging skills or areas of difficulty. So the tools that we have, especially in the neuroscience as a psychologist, was different tools. There's many out there. I use what's called the brief. It gives us 10 of these areas of the prefrontal lobe to talk about certain things. But that was the tipping point for me to say, wait a second. If I can go inside, remember in Egypt, if they thought many years ago, it wasn't yesterday, but many years ago, if they thought you had something going on upstairs, they would drill a hole in your skull and let out the evil spirits. I
Hmm.
wasn't going that route. It might have a cordless Black& Decker, but I'm not going that route. And so I have to realize and say, wait a second, there is so much more. There's so much more that the brain could offer, and yet how we're doing it is matching it with behavioral things and addressing it with our neurotransmitter drugs to increase, decrease. And I thought, yeah, that's okay, but I want to know more. What's going on? How can we change the firing? Is it too much, too little? I said, there
Hmm.
has to be something out there. So there is that curiosity that led me to where we're at now. But initially, we didn't have a lot of stuff. It was all behavioral modification.
Yeah.
Modify the maladaptive, inappropriate behavior with rewards and consequence. Not even thinking or giving somebody the thought that, you know what, if he could do it, he would. But he's just not there. He just doesn't have the tools. And so we talk about, in my journey, we got to give people tools for their backpack. Hence the first book, Anthony's Backpack, The Culture of Gentleness. And so it's allowing that to unfold. It's saying, wait a second, we got to collaborate with what we see. Yes, it's wrong to hit. I agree with you. It's wrong to yell. Well, unless the Cardinals are winning, the St. Louis Cardinals are winning, you got to yell, hey, we finally won a game. But in that, we have to look at some basic principles that I come from a good place and I want to do good as we connect. And sometimes I don't have the tools, whether
Hmm.
that's the communication skills, the emotional skills, or what I call the sensory motor. Because my team could be winning, I could be happy, I could communicate that, but that sensory motor, I say it's running fast and it's running loud. But now my team is losing. I'm communicating something different. So I won't talk about those words here right now because they're inappropriate. And my feelings are now I'm upset my team is losing. But that sensory motor, as I addressed, it's running fast and it's running loud. And so, how could we ask children or even people who struggle with the sensory processing to think it's the same? It's not. It's not. It is the same for their sensory motor, but the brain allows us to connect a little bit more, to go deeper, to allow them to see something tangible. And if they can't, that's why you and I are here. I'll walk with you. I can't tell you how many people I work with are very aggressive, very, very aggressive. And the only tool I have is to look in their eyes and say, when you see me, you are safe and you are loved. That's it. I can't give them any more, any less. But I know it works. I have seen it work unfold. It just, back then I couldn't measure it. You know, I was just like, hey, let's get out of here. Why? Well, we shouldn't be touching clients. We shouldn't be doing this. I mean, to say we don't love somebody, okay, who says I have to say it verbally? I could say it with my eyes. I could say it with my eyes. I don't know what you
Absolutely.
had going, but I could say it with my eyes, right? That's something that we get so narrow-minded on that, hey, let's move away. But now, remember, I'm just a kid from Gary, Indiana, not the smartest kid on the block. And like, I just need help. I'm not, you know, I'd like to say I have it all and I understand it all, but I don't. I wish I did. Wish I did. I know the important thing is collaborating, working together, and breaking down those barriers because you know what? The time is now.
Hmm.
We didn't have this back then. And now that we do, let's not be selfish. What we got,
Absolutely.
because it's yeah.
And that collaborative aspect as well. I mean, it really is what is going to be able to allow the people building this technology, or at least building it out and improving upon it, really to allow it to proliferate, right? And thereafter get it into the hands of individuals like you who are able to leverage it to the best of its ability. Because like you said, right, you're faced with a patient who is visibly upset, visibly aggressive, and there's no real way to even I guess even approach that. Instead of beforehand, you kind of just try to appeal to their emotions. You try to kind of ease their frustration, if you will, and it's a matter of just talking to them, right, and just kind of providing a sense of safety, like you mentioned beforehand. But now, if we're able to kind of take a peek under the hood and see what's going on, this is a completely different situation. It changes the entire game all in and of itself. Whereas we look at things like just, for one, clinical psychology, but for two, once again, improving upon somebody's quality of life, really. The ongoing emergence of these BCIs, if you will, have you yourself had a chance to kind of leverage any particular products? And if so, like, what has been your experience with them thus far, whether it's been positive or negative? Ooh, I think like I hit a point there.
There's some great tools out there. Tools get for $1,000 with some decent metrics. Support has been limited. And so that, you could sell a product, but where's your support? That has been a struggle for me. Another part is I'm still on the on the developmental, I'm still the kindergartner, you know. I'm still curious with all these toys. I got to have them all. That has this one for this. It has this. So there's so many things out there. And yet we have to take a look at everybody's creating some good tools. But where's your support once someone like me would purchase it? The other thing is, let's start learning and taking chances with sharing. It's not about having the answer. It's sharing what we're doing with it. I've been involved with now, going to present my work, very limited work, on looking at EEG and matching that up with what we call quality of life. I've done quality of life, what I call these 8 values, and matched it up with the DSM. So I get my students to think more beyond just symptoms. And I think if we realize what Richard J. Davidson has done in Wisconsin with his 6 dimensions of social mapping out the brain, he says, the brain doesn't work like the DSM. So Richard from Wisconsin, he talks about resilient outlook, social intuition, self-awareness, sensitivity, and attention. I think those were 6. He's mapped out and he says, why are we looking at the DSM? We should be looking at how the brain works. So, taking a look at what he's doing, looking at these devices that provide some metrics, right? Like attention, frustration, boredom. But I think, taking a look at what Richard's doing, collaborating, but identifying about what should it do. Should improve one's quality of life. So if I don't have a lot of activation in my occipital lobe, the back where I should be seeing things, or struggles with the prefrontal lobe that doesn't activate my planning and decision, I might need a planner, a day planner. Why? Because I need to see it, what I should be doing, and also work on strategies to initiate my movement. I know that might sound simple. Only 10% of people in our society will work on their priorities to execute. And so if we think about where we're at as a society, we want to do what's not important and not urgent.
Mm-hmm.
So we work on our C's, because it feels comfortable. Because if I fail, I might have judgment. If I fail, someone might say I'm an idiot. So what? They're already saying it now. Who cares? Live your life. Live your life. And so with these devices, beautiful things are happening. I'd like to sit at the table and see what people are doing, but we need some basic stuff. Like I said, I'm not the expert with the computer designing of the metrics. I'd like to know, well, I do know about the brain and what's involved with. I mean, especially simple strategies. If you think about especially students that are trying to study for the test, what do? We use our left brain and we read. And we read the chapter again, and we read the chapter again. And yet our right brain's hanging out doing nothing. We don't develop concepts. And so we develop simple strategies as you're reading the paragraph. How do I use my right brain? I draw. And I could show them in real time as they're reading and drawing, it's activating both parts of the brain. What a beautiful gift, because, they're like, Dr. Tony, you're remarkable. I said, well, I already told you that. Did you miss that lecture? And they're like, no, but until we see it, I'm not going to do it. So the devices have to be simplistic in a way that we could work on strategies that we already know, right? Simple thing, people talk about, I'm going to create something, I'm going to capture something. But if you think about what Steve Jobs did in his creation, he did 3 C's. He communicated what we thought, well, we didn't think we needed it, but he said we needed it, right? And so he communicated that, he created that, and he allowed us to capture that. That's all he did, and he was remarkable at it. That's the same thing with our devices. How are we going to communicate to people to say, wait a second, it's not about just using these devices for relaxing, right? It's about engaging the mind to be the best. I want to be the best. I'm not going to be second. It's not 99.9% is still like to me that B. It's either 100% or nothing at all. I am going beyond. And that's the whole thing with these devices. I got the relaxation piece. Well, maybe for some people, but not for others.
Well,
okay.
we're
But,
talking.
yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Hey, so I am not a scientist. I am not a brain expert. And I am curious, you're talking about the data that you're collecting and the devices that you're using. What is that data? And how does that tell you what you need to know to connect these dots that were not formally connected before?
Yeah. Well, there's some simple devices that companies already have. So we could have performance metrics, attention, frustration, boredom, cognitive load. Many companies have their own metrics. Those are great. Those are great because it removes, because that's how I got involved. I bought these 2 caps. Some lady liked what I was doing. Oh, what do you need? Another cup of coffee and $1,000. Well, times two. That's how it all started. Didn't learn. Then I started understanding. I got to know about EEGs. I'm like, okay, let's find an expert. Let's find a colleague who could help me out. And then with today's technology, I can map out the brain in less than 10 minutes and look at subcortical levels of activation that will identify what I already know in the neuroscience about certain areas of the brain. And so, for someone who does not have a lot of activation in the frontal lobe, they're not going to be good with simple things that we already know: planning, executing, organization. Or with the temporal lobe, just working on what I hear, how I'm processing language, right? How I'm using language. Or the parietal lobe of knowing how I feel and touch and move. Or the occipital lobe, how I see, is it in front and back? But that's, once again, using then the frontal lobe to assist with areas of what I don't see in the occipital lobe. Just the fact with those things, if you think about it, some of the work that we're doing right now, the Exercube, designed from Switzerland from my colleagues Anna and Stefan. Anna's a professor in human performance. Stefan is the computer expert, very focused on fitness. But yet we have to think about our aging population and people with intellectual disabilities. We just had an article just published last month in our journal to support people with intellectual disabilities, and we talked about quality of life. One of the major factors, 2 of them, is eating and exercising. And so I'm putting on a helmet in real time to look at 4 basic things. When you're exercising, or even before you exercise, is it because your frontal lobe doesn't have the organization? Is it your temporal lobe that doesn't have the right music or the right coach to be yelling and screaming at you? Only joking there. Is it the parietal lobe with having the right shoes or the fancy shorts or the tight shirt? Or it's what you see from the occipital lobe. Those basic things have not been discovered in the fitness world. We could say we're motivated by this gym, but what for? How? How does that work? Have we thought about it? No, we haven't. Let's put it on the brain and just work with people who struggle with their ability to be fit. Little distraction. One of my closest friends, Marvin Creamer, 113 when he passed away. 113. I want to be Marvin. I told him I want to be 115. When he was 110, he still had the ability. He said, Tony, it was about I became a prisoner of my passion. It was sad to see other people pass away, my wife, my kids, my cousins. But I became a prisoner to have the curiosity. He said, don't lose that. And that's a simple thing what we have. We got these devices. We have some things that are really facing us as a community that I got to find a way to exercise. And what's the barrier? Upstairs, and taking a look. And so we're mapping it out. It's remarkable. A young man, he's a catcher, loves the pitch. I said, you know what? You already did this with me, this brain mapping. Can we take a current one? Because what I'm hearing you say is you want to take a look at how can you really focus in with that ball. And we used it to be curious of how those areas of the brain are working to develop a tool, a training manual for him to pitch, for him to hit, and for him to catch.
That's interesting. So are you saying that, just I guess through the ongoing collection of this EEG data while he's, actively pitching, batting, etc., can now derive a manual to just improve upon just that general behavior over and over again. That's what you're saying.
Yes,
Huh.
yes. And we're doing it together. I mean, we're just 2 kids in the candy store, going down the aisle, picking and choosing, and then say, wait a second, I'm struggling with that. I see that. I understand that now because what you're sharing with me, we're teaching people about their brain. We're teaching them how our brain works. And what are you seeing on the screen? What are you seeing on the sheet of paper? And where are your limitations? What do you feel? It's endless. It is endless to think about how we can, and it's all about collaborating.
Yeah. When you think about self-actualization now, right?
Yeah.
It seems like beforehand it was like this mystic, unattainable thing that only the few were able to kind of figure out for themselves. Then, I guess for the rest of everyone else, had kind of struggled to just figure out their purpose. I mean, how do you think BCIs and being able to see EEG data build upon these things and kind of build effective curriculums for training people to understand themselves, understand their brains? You think, self-actualization will now become more of like, say, just natural development, if you will, instead of it being like this mystical thing to attain?
Well, there's always going to be that divide, the people that have and the people that don't. And, I always look at the gift that God gave me, that sometimes people might like the interactions with me and say, could I give you this? And using those devices to do good. I mean, 99% of the people that I work with can't afford any of this stuff. And so it's finding ways that we could remove those barriers and still have fun, right? Still enjoy, still connect. And yeah, maybe writing grants or have someone to bless you. I'm waiting for the lottery, but I guess someone told me I got to buy a ticket in order to win. And I'm like, that's what I forgot to do, right? But I've been blessed. I've been blessed. And so I see it continuing, but once again I'm only one. So we got to collaborate. And right, We can't all do this for free. We got to find ways that we could charge, that people would be willing to take that chance with us and to look and develop things that, yeah, we could get some money back to disperse it. I'm all for that. I'm all for that. I don't do a good job with that. I'm still on the learning curve. So
Aren't we
people out
all?
there want to help me, come on, but we got to find a better way, because I think whether you have or you don't have, I think everybody could benefit, because then we could see, truly see. I mean, this is remarkable that
Now,
we have more in common, right? We have more in common if we focus, right, on these intentional moments. Yeah.
something I wanted to kind of take a step back on. We had, when you think about like the collection of EEG data, right?
Yeah.
I guess, kind of to look at it from another standpoint, maybe from somebody else who might not be as familiar as, we might all be in this forum right here with, let's say, EEG data, its collection, and so on and so forth. And it might be worried about, the privacy of their own data. When you think about as well patient confidentiality, right?
Hmm.
Would you say that EEG data kind of falls under that umbrella as well, or is it kind of independent of that, if you will? It's a standalone, if you will, data that you could just, I guess, if you, for lack of a better way to describe it, you have that data separate and aside from your patient data, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I know for me, I treat it the same as any other data. Well, it doesn't matter if it's EEG or an assessment or an intake data. I treat it the same way. I treat it the same way. And yet, if our invitation is to say, could I share? Could I share with others? Then we follow those guidelines. But that's how we invite people in. Shared with so many, and some people, come in and say, well, you can't do this and say this person has this because here are the articles. And I talked to my colleague who says you shouldn't be doing this. All I could do is I'm going to validate what I'm hearing. You're saying that from what you're sharing with me, these articles and your two colleagues, that we should not be using EEG to least identify with someone, especially someone who might have ADHD, right? A lot going on with the brain, that we can, whether you have it or not, you're using your brain to understand certain areas that are working, that need a little bit of boost, that need a little bit of let's calm it down a little bit for you to be successful. Hell, I could give you a test, Connors, the Browns, whatever, and quickly, what does that do? What is that going to do?
Mm-hmm.
But this
So
will
what
also
you
have
have,
a lot of implications, not just for like happiness and wellness, but for education, right? And how
huge,
people learn, right? And just, are we giving people information in the way that their brain needs to receive it, And I think that we're opening just like this whole new world for how we might change education, not just how we might change the way we approach people to, treat them with more humanity than we have been in the past. But yeah, super
huge,
interesting.
huge. A little girl, she had very good reading skills, which showed in the left brain activity. Not a lot in the right side with the temporal lobe, not a lot in the occipital on both sides, in a struggle with the prefrontal lobe. And so I told the family, I said, you know what? She's really good as a reader, but she's not remembering everything. And so I said, her mom's a painter. So I said, let's create, and she loved her mom. I said, let's create her own paint studio. So when you read the sentence, the witch with the black hat and the purple cat, she then went to the paint studio and painted the witch with the black hat and the purple cat. And so on Friday, and this still continues, she's able to ace her exam. And so when she gets off the bus, I got a little kid who wants to call Dr. Coney and says, I got a 10 out of 10, buddy, a 10 out of 10. But
That's
it's
amazing.
looking at, right? That's what we're doing.
Right.
That's the impact.
You're
You know,
unlocking it. You're just giving them the freedom to actually use their brain in the way that their brain works and not work against it in the way that other people expect it. Amazing.
and yet I'm not devaluing my colleagues that
No,
are using the assessment to say, you have this and I'm prescribing this. That's okay.
different.
Let's build on that. Well, so what? Now that I have it, what the hell do I do with it?
Yeah.
Sorry, you might have to
No,
void that out. I said, yeah, well,
you're allowed to say
I'm
hell.
a
That
loud
actually,
one.
I swear a lot, so luckily I haven't dropped any F-bombs yet in this.
That's all right. If
Ditto.
my mom was here, she would spell it. I said, Mom, that's just bad enough. She goes, no, it's totally different. I said, no. If you're going to spell it or say it, it's the same thing. It's the
Amazing.
same thing. It's the same thing.
Frankly, I feel like I could talk about this all day with you because this is so interesting. But in the interest of podcast time,
Yeah.
one question that we're going to ask all of our podcast guests is, what is an aspect of brain science that you think will completely surprise us once we understand it?
Dr. Tony was right.
Will that completely surprise us, though, or will we just
I
say,
Yeah,
think
I
no?
that'll
think
be
so.
surprising.
Yeah, I mean, right. I think we're in it together, but I think it's more in minority right now. We're in a
Mm.
society that realizes that we need other tools than what we're talking about. We're talking about healing, connecting, creating meaningful relationship. When we fully understand that, it will reshape how we approach care in a humane way as a whole, not as an individual piece. I think that's so crucial, and I am probably going to screw this up. So please forgive me if you go to cite this. But the first president of the Czech Republic, when he approached the U.S. Congress, and I've been invited to be in the Czech Republic many of times, and I do this thing standing on chairs, so they remember two things: Dr. Tony, and he'll walk on the tables to teach his class. But the president talked about quoting the salvation of the human world. And I think what he said lies nowhere else but in the human heart. And so we need to do, I think, as we examine that heart, like Davidson said with the 6 emotional things that he mapped out. He's the expert, right? When Davidson talked about resilient outlook, social intuition, self awareness, sensity. Did I say it? May I said attention? Sorry. I tried to get those
I think you did.
6. But, that's where it's at. He's already laid it out for us. But can we move away from the diagnostic manual that only looks at behavior? As we begin to realize that neuroscience will show this, it's already doing it, right? And it's not just about modifying responses or creating an environment that focus on compliance, correction, or consequence, but growth, pathways for resilience, emotional regulation, intrinsic worth. I have a lot of kids that talk about identity, but we're self-worth,
Yeah.
self-esteem, we're self-confidence. And does it build a bridge to a sense of belonging? No, it doesn't. So where's your identity? It's not here because it doesn't have it has the missing pieces, as I addressed.
Yeah.
But we are going to be amazed to really think that when we fully understand, I mean, you have to think about, I'll leave with this, is you have to think about Descartes. He was married twice and he said men had more teeth.
He
He
said
also
that?
said that if you take the heavier ball, it will get to the ground first. We know that people didn't check that for over 1,000 years,
So funny.
right? Over 1,000 years. So what we're talking about could be wrong, right? Not what I'm saying. Not what I'm
Yeah.
saying, but what we know already. So it's not anything new. It's just validating if I connect with you, there's more meaning and value versus trying to correct you.
Totally. And then
And we're
there's
going to
all
map that out. We're going to map that out.
that's what matters. It's making hard data for all of the people who want to say, oh, your feelings, like whatever. When I was a kid, I did it this way, so every kid should do it this way. And, everyone cares too much about feelings these days, but you're going to show data. You're going to say, hey, it's not about what I think. It's about what I know to be true in the brain, what matters for the future. And I feel like that is going to open the door to real change, I think, in the way that we treat people and the way that we teach people and the way that we help people maximize their potential. So amazing.
Absolutely.
Dr. Tony, final question before we leave. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners before we say goodbye? Could be current research, could be more ways to learn about your work or upcoming projects, whatever you would like to share.
It's funny because my youngest son, Peter James, says, Dad, you're everywhere on the internet.
Influencer.
Yeah, and I'm like, is it good stuff? He goes, yeah, I was showing him, yeah, I know that picture, and all that. But, let's connect, let's collaborate. I'm not the smartest kid on the block. I'll drink coffee with you. If you want to see what we're doing, we could help not so much cover your traveling costs, but we have a beautiful place that we put people up. It's less a block away from Lake Michigan. We want to build community, right? We want to collaborate. And God has blessed me with connecting with people, just like what we're doing today. Somehow, some way, let's connect. I don't have the answer to anything, so a little disclosure. But I'll work with you to find it. I'll work with you. Man, I love work. I got that bad gene from my parents that, work 24/7, but I love it. I'm very passionate about what we do, about the Institute. Find out more, send me an email, drop me a line. But yeah, but most important, I appreciate this time that you have given me.
And we
We
appreciate
appreciate
you
yours.
so much. And we'll drop your LinkedIn profile in the show notes and a link to your institute. And then if people want to reach out, they know where to find you. And I do think the best thing about this industry is the amount of collaboration that's going on right now. So you heard it from Dr. Tony himself. If you want to collaborate, he is all for it. So thank you, Dr. Tony. Thank you, Jev. It's been a great conversation.